our focus today is on the first three visa pathway. Let's start off with the general skill migration programs. All right. Now, just again, one slide just to share why the Australia PR. For those who is not so well aware about what comes with the Australia PR. Now, I would like to give some highlights here. So when you obtain the PR, so you are given the rights to live, work, and study in Australia, and that extended to also New Zealand because being an Australia PR, you can actually apply to become a New Zealand resident upon arrival at the New Zealand airport. By virtue of being an Australia PR. So that actually give your family members, an alternative option should you or any one of you choose to live or work or study, in New Zealand, of course, with the benefits. So when we talk about the benefits, right, it actually, one of the most important benefits, I guess, is the educations. Most of the clients, I would say probably 99% of the clients, do share that the main objective, is to actually seeking the education uh, benefits, or rather, the education opportunity for the kids to be able to study in Australia. And being a PR, that benefit starts from the primary school and and as well as the secondary school, and the education benefits are free. And it doesn't stop there. The benefits extended to cover the university, which is a tertiary education. And we are talking about the 30%. Yeah, you're looking at paying 30% as versus international students. Yeah. Another important benefit is the Medicare. So being a PR, as generally, uh, the Medicare is all well covered. If you go to the GP, if for any reasons any PR holder has to be hospitalized, in general, most of the medication, boarding, surgery are all well covered. Yeah. So it is not common, in Australia, to have a private insurance, although you may choose to do that. Yeah. As compared to Asian country, I think literally almost every one of us, insured with a private insurance because the medication cost is expensive, the hospitalization is expensive. Yeah, especially if you are seeking the private support. Yeah. Then we are talking about also welfare. That Australia being a country that is wealth and have a comprehensive welfare system, and this welfare extended to cover, for example, unemployment benefits. During the COVID, all the support system are available. An old age allowance. Uh, so there are various and many benefits that are available, and these welfare benefits are taken care under or managed under an authority called, or a department called Centrelink. Yeah. But of course, being an Australia PR, right, you can also consider to be to be an Australian citizen. Yeah, after several years and after fulfilling the residency requirements. But of course, you could also consider sponsoring, your family member. If you remember the option number 4 that I mentioned earlier, you can consider sponsoring your parents, or your spouse who is not a PR, or your child if the child is born outside Australia. Yeah. So these are the general benefits and why is it that it's important. So in short, being a PR, you do enjoy almost equal benefit as an Australian citizen. Yeah. Well, I guess the only difference is, you don't have the rights to vote between as an Australian PR as versus, an Australian citizen, right? And there are certain federal level of, position where, especially if they involve holding guns, and the you might have limitation or restrictions to hold that position, yeah, as an Australian PR. Other than that, in terms of the benefits, both PR and citizens share the equal benefits. All right. Now, Talking about general skill migration, well, which includes English, you must have, you must meet the minimum English. The higher score, the better. Shortly, I will share with you the different level of the English requirements. All right. Importantly, you must be below 45 years old. Right. Do take notes. There is no age waiver under the general skill migration program. If you're above 45, then these programs would not be suitable, to you, right? And the ideal age to apply for this general skill migration, or the optimum age for you to apply for this general skill migration, is really 32 years old and below. Yeah, so that age range would give you the highest score in terms of the point, right? Occupation, you must have a migratable skill. Yeah, and we are talking about more than 400 types of migratable skill. Yeah, the skill, of course, has to be at the skill level, right? And what do I mean by skill level is, to give you an example, if you're working as an accountant or CFO, or financial controller, but without a qualification, a bachelor degree. For example, if you have been working in your whole life, to move from a bookkeeper to accountant to a financial controller, or rather CFO, but your highest qualification remains at diploma level, then you won't consider as having, a migratable skill, because your skill is not assessed at, the skill level, will not be assessed, to meet the skill level. Yeah. So it is a combination of the qualification and the experience that actually, for you to actually meet the, this particular criteria. Yeah. Being healthy is important. So that actually extended to cover the whole entire family member. Should one of you do not meet the health check, then the visa application will be refused. Yeah. And if any one of you have the medical condition or medical history, do talk to us to make sure that, you do not have, and that medical condition doesn't have any implication in meeting the health requirement. Okay. And having to meet the good character is also one of the important criteria. All right. Now, let's have a look at the point. As you're aware and mentioned earlier, this general skill migration comes with the point system, and you are given points based upon the age. For example, I'm not sure if every one of you would be able to see. The fonts is a bit small, but I would just highlight a few, important notes, yeah, for you to be aware of. Now, under, the age, there are different group. As I mentioned earlier, you can't be more than 45 years old. As soon as you reach 45 and you are out, yeah, you won't be eligible to apply for this visa. And again, the being 18 to 25 years old, you are given 25 points, 25 to 30 to less to 32, because it is less than 33. Yeah, 25 to 32, then you have 30 points. So the points drop by 10 points as the age progress. And community language, it is interesting that the Australia recognize and appreciate someone who speaks more than one language. Yeah. And if you are able to pass the test, it is a test called NAATI, N-A-A-T-I. It is a translator and interpreter test. Yeah. If you're able to pass the test, then you will be awarded with an extra 5 points. Yeah. English being compulsory, even if you hold a British passport, you hold an American passport, you would need to sit for the test, just as anyone holding, a passport from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Vietnam, from China, yeah, anywhere, in the world. Yeah. And although the minimum score required for IELTS is band 6, but that gives you 0 point. Band 7 gives you 10 points. Band 8 or more will give you the 20 point. So to meet, the program has become very competitive. So to meet the requirements, often the time the candidate would need to meet or score the English at level 7. Yeah. And of course, your experience outside Australia, is also being considered, and you are given point up to a maximum of 15 points if you do have, more than 8 years of the working experience. Yeah, over the last 10 years. Yeah. Then partner skill, it is very interesting. If your partners do meet the qualification requirements and have a skill, your partner can contribute 10 points. Alternatively, if your partner, doesn't have the right qualification or doesn't have the right appropriate skill, your partner would be able to contribute 5 points by passing the English at level 6. All right. So for those who is single and not married, good news, you will automatically be awarded with the 10 points. Yeah. And you need to remain single throughout the application until the decision is being made. Right. So qualification, you're given point based upon diploma. Then do take note, bachelor degree and master degree, both are given, or you're entitled to 15 points. Yeah. So both are considered at the same level. Yeah. And the PhD holder will be given extra point, which is at 20 point. All right. Now, talking about the general skill migration, right? The first steps, I spoke about, the basic requirement. I spoke about, I give you an idea about the point system. But really, the very first step is to start out with the skill assessment, because to embark on this program, you have to meet the skill and be assessed as one of the skill under that 400 skill, within the list of the 400 occupation. Yeah. And do remember, the example of the of someone who is an accountant that I have quoted earlier. So this is the idea of how the assessment works. So the different authority who is looking after, the different occupation, for example, if you're engineer, then you would have to submit the application to Engineer Australia. If you're IT professional, then you have to submit your assessment to Australia Computer Society. If you're accountant, then you have the CPA, and all the accounting, the other two accounting body, right? You have three options. If you are a business professional, such as, marketing specialist, such as HR, such as statistician, such as uh, 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 property agent, for example. So such as music teacher, for example. So it's a different authority called Vet Assess. So there are all these 400 occupation are being allocated to a specific assessing authority who will determine whether or not you acquire the right qualification experience and to be considered as having, a migratable skill. So that is what, we call skill assessment, right? Now, talking about general skill migration, right? There are really 3 different types that you can consider. Again, depending on what your skill is and what your occupation is. So different occupation will determine how many options can you approach, or how many occupation can you consider, to move forwards with the general skill migration program, right? Now, 189, let me start off with the 189. Under these visa programs, you do not require any sponsorship or nomination. You're applying on your own, right? So these programs typically suitable for doctors, nurses, teachers, for example, yeah, and then IT professional, engineers, and a few others, right? Having said that, this program is very competitive. Now, when we talk about point system, right, the general skill migration start off with a 65 point being the basic requirement. But I must say, for you to consider 189, the challenge is, to having to meet the current point, yeah, which I will share shortly, yeah. And often the time you will have to achieve on average about 90 point. Yeah, so that is, the point. So having 65 points will not give you a chance to be invited at all. Yeah, so 90 point being the average point, but again, it depends on the occupation. If you are the trades workers, for example, motor mechanic, yeah, so you might, and the competition is not that great. So 65 points might be sufficient already for you. Yeah. So that's how 189 being considered and works. And 190 and 491 both require or involve the state's governments to play a role. And where they comes in is they would consider what are the current skill or the occupation that the state require based upon the survey from time to time. And they will publish what are the occupation currently needed or the shortages in the states. And if you have that relevant occupation, then you could actually submit an expression of interest to the respective states and wait for them to actually, pick you up from the pool, and if that comes through, you will receive an invitation to move forwards with to be able to submit the application under 190 and 491. Yeah. The difference between the 491 and 190 again is 190 being a PR, a direct PR programs, just like 189, which is a direct PR programs. 491, on the other hand, starts you off with the temporary residence, and 3 years later, you will have the pathway to apply to become a PR. In the first 3 years, if you are going to live in Australia, do take notes. There is some restrictions on where you can stay, right? And you can't stay. So you're not supposed to live in Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. If you were to choose to live there, yeah, initially for the first 3 years, yeah. So if you were to live in any of this area, then you won't be qualified to apply for the PR, right? Another options, not option, another important criteria for you to meet the PR requirement is to have 3 years taxable income. All right. Yeah. So this 3 years taxable income is important. There's no minimum salary. All you need is to file 3 years of income tax returns. So even though if you have investment income, right? For those who choose to live there, decide not to work, but you do have income from investment, for example, the fact that you are filing 3 years of taxable income, that meets the requirement. All right. Okay. Now I mentioned about 189. I won't be repeating this. So now this is to give you an idea, on the process. I would say on average, the process is taking about 1.5 years on average to 2 years. It can go even up to 2 years, right? If your skill, if you were to consider starting from the skill migration, skill assessment, for example, skill assessment, and which generally it could take 1 month to 3 months, depending on which authority who is assessing you, right? And once you have been successfully assessed, then you get into the expression of interest. Yeah, depending on which visa pathway that you qualified. Also depending on our assessments against your profile, and your point system, we will determine which is the pathway that you are qualified for, and also which is the pathway that you have a higher chance of being invited. Yeah, and we will advise you accordingly. So we will submit expression interest based upon your profile and your point system, right? And we will manage your application programs of this expression interest, and look at the changes of the state's criteria until you receive an invitation, right? Now, what is interesting about this 190 and 491, right? So as I mentioned earlier, right, it is competitive. However, it is also very important for you to be aware about which states, give you a higher chance of being invited. See, sometimes, clients come forward and say, hey, Desmond or James, we would like to have, we wanted to plan to live in Melbourne, for example. If we don't see, your occupation being invited by Melbourne or by Victoria, then we would suggest that you consider other states, right? Talking about 190 and 491, do take notes. This is very important. Do take notes. There's no legal enforcement for you to actually live and committed or stay in the state that nominated you. Yeah. If you are being nominated by one state, you could actually choose to live in another state. So this is not a violation of the visa condition. Legally, under federal law, you do have the rights to live anywhere, you like in Australia, being a holder of the visa 189 and 190. Except 491, do take notes. Again, my highlight is do not live in Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. So the key over here is to actually seek the state's nomination from the states that increase your chances of being invited. Yeah. And we are well versed with all the respective invitation criteria, from the state's government. For example, the last meeting we had, with the South Australia government is they will consider those with the high English. They will consider those, with the high point. Yeah, there are certain level of the occupation. For example, specialist manager. Yeah, being a finance manager, receive an invitation as versus an accountant. Yes, so we have clients turning 45 years old, being a finance manager, receive an invitation before turning 45 years old. So working in a big company do play a role, right? Having the same English level, having the same point. If you are working for a big organization, especially the organization or your company that has a business dealing with a company in South Australia, all this need to be highlighted because that actually increases your chances of being invited. So where it comes in, is to manage your, application, look at your profile, put you into the best position to secure your invitation within the shortest periods of times, right? With the invitation, that moves you to the visa application, right? And the last components or the last criteria, which is very important during the visa application, is the medical examination and the character that I have mentioned earlier. And that complete the process, and your PR comes straight away if it is 189 and 190, and 491, you are starting off with a temporary residence and followed by the PR later on. All right. Now, this is the latest statistic on, the expression, the pool of the expression interest. This graph gives you an indication on, the point, right? How many people are generally in the expression interest right now, and each of the point starting from 65, 70 to 110, what is the range that we are looking at? You do notice majority of the people are, 70 or rather 75. As point increase, the pool getting, smaller and smaller, right? So 90 point, being an ideal, an optimum point. If you score 90 point, congratulations, you'll be you'll be expecting to have an invitation, in a short period of time. All right. Yeah. So now this gives you an idea, on the point invitation. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, right, on average 90 point, yeah, or above. So this is to give you an idea on engineers, IT professional, and medical professional, right, and a business professional. If you are exploring, this is specifically for 189, yeah. Although 190 and 491, the point could be slightly lower, yeah. But if you're exploring 189, do take notes. In other words, do take notes, the point is high. And in other words, if you do not score, the equal point for an invitation, then we would manage your application under 190 or 491. Yeah. Next. So this is education, lecturer, school teacher, for example. Yeah. So trades workers, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, most of the trades workers, is actually looking at 65 points. Yeah. Okay. Now I kind of like cover what you should be aware of under the general skill migration program, and I would like to pass the floor over to James. James, over to you, please.
Thank you, Desmond.
Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Just let me change over.
Yes,
Okay.
James, I think you will be able to control now.
Yeah, all good. So thank you, everyone, and welcome to our session tonight. So as Desmond mentioned, I'm also I'm a principal registered migration agent, registered in 2004 and practicing in both Australia and New Zealand immigration. So I'm going to talk about two other major visa categories, the skills in demand, which is the temporary work visa option for Australia, and the national innovation visa, which was formerly known as the global talent visa. So we'll talk first about the skills in demand visa. So Australia has a temporary work visa program. In the Singapore context, this would be similar to an employment pass or an S pass, and it allows employers to sponsor workers to come to Australia on a temporary basis. Australia does also have direct permanent residence options. So for some high demand occupations, an employer in Australia can sponsor you directly for permanent residency, but that's not so common. That's usually for employees that they've got a good relationship with. So in most cases, an employer would sponsor for a temporary work visa, and that's now known as the skills in demand visa. Now, I'm just
James, is the slide went off?
no, it's there. I'm just I can't control it.
Oh,
Okay.
are you able to take the control?
I might just switch to presenting on my side because I can't actually move the screens. Just bear with me for a moment, people, and I will just bear with us.
What if I help you with the moving the slides? Would you like me to do that?
I know it's fine. I can share my screen, so it'll be fine. Okay.
Okay.
We're there. Okay. Now, as I was saying, the skills in demand is the temporary work visa for Australia. Now, just a little bit of interesting history with this. This was previously known as the temporary skills shortage visa. And the government was intending to fully replace this with a whole new visa scheme. Due to legislative and administrative limitations and basically running out of time while the government had its sittings to pass new legislation in Australia last year, they had to do a quick workaround to get this through. And what they did was they just renamed the existing visa and just did some small, relatively minor changes to the program rather than implementing a whole new visa scheme. So it is very similar to the previous visa, but there are a few significant changes that have occurred. Now, there's an intention to have 3 pathways under this. Only 2 of these pathways have been implemented currently. So the 2 pathways that we now have is a specialist skills pathway, and this is for people that are considered highly specialized and they identify them by their salary. So they're looking at applicants here that are being offered a position in Australia with a salary of at least 135,000 Australian dollars. And generally, this is available to all occupations. The only exception, technicians and trades workers can't go through under this, but all other kinds of workers could go through. Conceivably, even if a cleaner was being paid this salary, they could go through with this. But generally, you will be seeing more professional roles going through, but wide range of occupations, just excluding technicians and trades workers with a high salary. These will also be processed in a much faster processing time. We're typically looking at a week or 2 for the processing time for these applications. So very, very fast. Considering that under the previous version of this visa, we'll be looking at months for the processing time, sometimes exceeding 6 months for the processing time. So the government is committed to much faster processing times, generally talking about weeks for both of these streams, in fact. But the specialist skills will be the higher priority for processing. The second one, which will make the bulk of applications, is the core skills pathway. And there's been a lot of talk about this in recent times because to do the core skills pathway, your occupation needs to be on an occupation list called the CSOL, the Core Skills Occupation List. This has just recently been published in December, And it has a wide range of professional occupations and some other trades and technician occupations as well. The minimum salary requirement is now $73,150. Previously, we were looking at around $55,000. It has now been increased to $73,000. What this means is, if you've got a job offer from Australia, generally you will not be able to go through under this visa if the salary is being offered less than $73,000. So you must be earning at least $73,150 for your job offer in Australia. Now, there is an exception to all of this, which is labour agreements. And labour agreements I haven't presented here because this is a very complicated, exceptional process. It typically takes about a year to get an approval just to be able to do the visa for labour agreements. And it's where an employer negotiates with the Australian government to have specialised criteria to sponsor workers. This is not generally for one-off type employment. This is usually for large-scale special cases. For example, in Western Australia, McDonald's negotiated with the government to bring a lot of workers in from the Philippines to run McDonald's stores in regional areas in Western Australia because they couldn't find local staff to fill the roles, and they could source suitable staff from the Philippines. So they negotiated with the government to have a special agreement to bring these people in. And there are other situations. We've got labour agreements for the aged care industry. We've got labour agreements under what's called DARMA, which is special agreements with employers in regional areas that want to hire. And they allow the employers to access certain exemptions to salary requirements, to work experience or qualification requirements, or other needs. So there are some special situations under labour agreements that we can tap into. But if a company wants to negotiate their own labour agreement to hire someone, it's generally not practical unless they're doing it at a large scale. So for most people, we'll be talking about the specialist skills or the core skills. But just to remember, if you are talking to an employer in a regional area of Australia, there may be some options under DARMA that give some concessions, and that's something we could discuss on a case-by-case basis. Now, the skills in demand, or known as the 482 visa, allows an employer to sponsor workers to go to Australia. What a lot of people don't know is that the sponsor can also be an overseas employer. So an overseas employer that is currently not operating in Australia can also sponsor workers to go to Australia, and they can sponsor them to service or support to clients in Australia, or to actually establish operations in Australia. So there is flexibility for that. And that's something we do use. And it is possible even for someone to be sponsored where they do have ownership or management involvement in the company overseas. However, I do have to caution that the government is very wary, and they want to make sure that the person doing this is going through based upon a genuine need to perform duties in Australia, rather than trying to get themselves a work visa in Australia. But there are possibilities, as I said, for overseas companies to sponsor workers. It's also possible for new companies in Australia to sponsor. So if a company is set up in Australia and provided it's already started operating, and usually we say for one or 2 months minimum, and can show that it's got some expenses, there's some activities happening, even if it's not full scale yet, you can actually still sponsor a worker to come in from overseas and work in that company in Australia. Now, it's also possible, once you've been in Australia on a temporary work visa, to apply for permanent residency, and that's after 2 years of working in Australia. Now, a couple of things to say about this. It is possible to job hop and go between different employers. So you can still go and work with different employers and still count time towards that 2-year requirement to qualify for permanent residency. So if you lose your job, you can move on to another employer. And an interesting change the government made last year is they're now given a 6-month window when someone loses their job under this work visa before they have to leave Australia. And what that means is if your employment ceases, you've got a further 6 months that you can continue to stay on in Australia, find a new employer, and then get that employer to sponsor you to continue working in Australia. If you don't want to find another employer, then you've got 6 months just to continue on living in Australia before you have to move back to your home country. So quite a lot of flexibility there the government's provided. And as I said, for that 2-year requirement, you can move between different jobs and different employers within that 2-year period. So when I say different jobs, the same occupation, but different employers. Now, one of the requirements when you are applying for this is the employer must do what's called labour market testing. And this is basically a process where the employer advertises the jobs through several channels in Australia to determine if there is a genuine need for that role in Australia that can't be filled by local hires in Australia. So the idea is to encourage employers to employ Australians and Australian residents first before seeking overseas employees to come and fill the role. This is called labour market testing. Now, there are some international agreements that Australia has, particularly free trade agreements, where they've agreed to recognise people from or workers from other countries on equal footing with workers from Australia. And fortunately, both Malaysia and Singapore and a couple of other Asian countries do have this option where an applicant from these countries is treated like an Australian employee in terms of labour market testing, meaning the employer does not have to prove they can't find anyone locally in Australia to fill the role first, and they can just employ them directly under one of these work visas. And that applies to citizens of Malaysia. For Singaporeans, it applies both to citizens and permanent residents in Singapore. So even if you're not a citizen of Singapore, but you're a permanent resident, then you can use this provision, which means it's easier for that employer to hire you. Now, if you were an American, for example, going through, the employer would have to advertise the role first for 4 weeks before they can consider hiring you. So this is a really nice concession available to Malaysia, Singapore, and a few other ASEAN countries. And there are a couple of other countries as well, but not many countries have this option, such as Malaysia or Singapore. Now, in terms of that pathway to permanent residency, I mentioned before that if you've been working for 2 years on the temporary work visa in Australia under the 482 work visa, you can then move on to permanent residency. Now, that's provided the employer agrees to support that application for permanent residency. And it must be the same employer that you last worked with on the 482. So although you can change employers, the final employer needs to agree to support your application for permanent residency. There is an age limit for that transition to permanent residency of 45 years of age. So you must be under 45 when you apply for the permanent residency. For the temporary visa, there is no age limit. But for that permanent residency transition, it's an age limit of being under 45 years. However, we can waive that requirement, and there's a few cases where we can do that, including senior lecturers and a few other special circumstances. But a general widespread option is to demonstrate a high income. And if you can demonstrate that you've met the high income requirements in Australia, which are currently set to 175,000 Australian dollars per annum, and met this for the last 2 years, then you can apply for the permanent residency with an age waiver, so that 45 age limit doesn't apply. Now, the other thing to also consider, if you are not looking at the employer sponsored, or maybe you don't want to wait for the 2 years, there are other options that can be considered. And the fact that you're already living and working in Australia on a temporary visa opens up possibilities for things like state territory government nomination. Now, Desmond talked about the pathways under general skilled migration, which included getting nomination from the states and territories. That is an increased possibility for you when you're in Australia working there already. For example, in Queensland, Brisbane, the state government offers nomination for direct permanent residency under subclass 190 if you've been living and working there for 3 to 6 months. Some other states will do this as well. South Australia will do this, although they typically look for 12 months work there. Western Australia is also open to doing this. Victoria and New South Wales give preference to people that are living and working there, but they don't have set criteria around that. So for that one, I do quite like Queensland So Brisbane and other areas in Queensland, where they say if you've been working here for 3 months or 6 months, it depends upon the area in Queensland, then we'll offer you nomination for the full range of occupations under that visa. So that's a skills and demand visa. I'm going to talk briefly about the National Innovation Visa now. Now, Desmond talked about the general skilled migration. And with general skilled migration, as you saw, there's a point system, and you get points for your work experience, for your age, and other similar factors. But what the program doesn't do is identify people that are outstanding in some way. It doesn't give any recognition for your seniority. It doesn't give any recognition for your innovation, for your awards, for having a strong reputation in the industry. So someone like Bill Gates, for example, who created a successful company like Microsoft, would be treated the same way as a low-level IT manager that is in a company of 10 people. They would be treated the same way under general skilled migration. There's no way to differentiate between the two. We don't look at the size of the employer. We don't look at their achievements as any of the factors under this. So the National Innovation Visa is a visa that's designed to identify those outstanding individuals and give them an express pathway to get permanent residency in Australia. And that express pathway gives full permanent residency without any conditions. Just like the general skilled migration PR pathways, you get a full PR without any obligations to do any activities in Australia. You have full permanent residency. So you could study, you could work, start your own business, sit on the beach all day and drink beer if you really wanted to. So a full range of options there. Now, it is required for this that you demonstrate you have outstanding achievements. Now, prior to the 7th of December, this was known as a Global Talent Visa. And I have to say, it was a little bit easier under the Global Talent Visa. We had many candidates went through under this with good reference letters from people in the industry talking about good things they've done, major projects they've been involved with, lifting the revenue of the company, doing international sales, helping companies implement new technologies, developing innovative software. We were able to get people through on this basis. But the government has become more stringent from the 7th of December with the transition to this new visa, and they're looking for higher tier candidates. And they've changed how they assess those achievements. That's the key thing here. How they assess the person's achievements and how they assess whether or not they're outstanding has changed in a significant way. Now, I've jumped ahead of myself a little bit here. So under the previous visa, it was a lot easier to do this. We'd identify them as being under certain sectors that were in high demand, and they had good reference letters for the work that they've done. So the government's redefined how these assessments are done. One of the good things that the government has changed, however, with the new visa is you will need a nominator, which is someone that's an Australian citizen or Australian company or Australian permanent resident in Australia that is noted in the industry and can act as a referee for you. Now, that was needed early in the process. That requirement has been removed. So there's 2 stages to this process. First stage is an expression of interest where you put forward your information to the Australian government. An industry panel will look at that and decide whether or not you meet the criteria. And if they do, they invite you to apply for the visa. Only when we apply for the visa do we then need to get that nominator sorted out. So that initial stage, the expression of interest, we only need to identify your achievements and give a rundown of how you're outstanding, and you've got outstanding achievements for that review by the panel. So that's made it a little bit easier. Previously, we had to identify that nominator upfront, so we don't have to worry about that now. Now, one of the challenges our clients often face is finding that nominator, and that's something we can also help with. We have nominators through our own connections, and we also work with agencies in Australia that essentially act like matchmaking agencies to matchmake very experienced nominators with our clients, and that's been very successful. So we've got lots of options to identify suitable nominators for our clients. So don't worry if you can't find a nominator. That's definitely something we can assist you with. Now, the focus now in terms of assessing the eligibility has shifted. And the things the government is ideally looking for, you can see here, include international awards, national research grants. So there's a very strong focus now on research, academia and research, academic influence. And for that, we're typically looking for a high-ranked PhD. And by high-ranked, we're talking about PhDs that would typically be in the top 100 universities. And the main ranking they look for that is the Times Higher Education ranking of the top 100 universities with a high H-index. So H-index is a person's citations and scholarships ranking. And the H-index that the person would need to demonstrate would be appropriate for their stage of their career. So an early stage researcher, which typically would be in the first 10 years of their PhD, getting their PhD, we would look for a H-index of 14 or more. But that would go up for later stages in their career. And we would also look for evidence that they've been publishing in significant journals and well-respected publications. We'll also be looking for entrepreneurial success, experience doing innovative investments. So things like angel investors, experience in investing in innovative startups, being an angel investor, VC investments, and so on. Also, high income threshold is a factor that's considered in determining if someone is of the right caliber. Now, I do have to say, just showing a high income threshold alone, and it's set at 175K, is not going to be enough. But it's one factor that will be considered that will help push your application up in terms of assessing your achievements. So for working professionals, in most cases, the things we'll be looking for would be their reputation, in particular giving keynote speeches and there being articles about them, but mainly speaking at large, significant industry events, being recognized as a thought leader in their industry, in addition to having a high income threshold. They'd be the major factors we'd look for working professionals. There's also a pathway for recent PhD graduates. And this opens up opportunities for PhD graduates where they've graduated within the last 3 years. So the conferral was in the last 3 years, and there are pathways for them. And for these PhD graduates, they do give them a little bit of a concession because they know that yet they haven't had time to really establish themselves in their career. So we'd look at their research they've done, hopefully some publications they've done, and look at the value and potential value of that research to Australia. Now, there is another level to the National Innovation Visa that we don't yet have defined, and that is state territory government nomination. So just like Desmond talked about the general skilled migration and being options to get nomination from the states and territories, the states and territories will also be able to nominate people for the National Innovation Visa. But the states and territories will have to come up with their criteria for this, and we don't yet have that. So we do expect in coming months to see the various states and territories to come up with the criteria for this. We've talked to the South Australian government, and they've said they're going to do this. Queensland are going to do this. New South Wales are going to do this. At this time, Western Australia are not planning to undertake or be involved in this program. We would also expect Victoria to be involved as well. But it will probably take a few months for these states and territories to work out their criteria and come up with an idea for this. It will be interesting to see what they decide, because remember that PR does not have any obligations to do anything in that state or territory or undertake any activities in Australia. So we'll have to see what the states and territories will decide for their criteria. And I do think they will look at some sort of connection to the state and possibly some sort of agreement with startups or incubators in that state as a prerequisite before they consider you for nomination. Because a lot of the focus for the states and territories is likely to be around entrepreneurs and people that can help with startups within the state. And that will likely require some involvement with startup incubators within the state. They'll also be looking for people, like I said before, angel investors and people with experience in doing investments in VC and startups. Also, they're encouraged to consider athletes and creatives that would be able to compete or participate in Australia at an international level and lift up Australia's visibility in that particular field. Now, of course, these are the initial guidelines. It's up to the states and territories to decide what they want to do. So they could do additional criteria and factors as well, but this is likely to be the starting point for the states and territories. And we'll let you know, we'll have information about this when this information becomes available. Okay, Desmond, would you like to talk about the other options, or would you like me to do it?
Sure, I can, or you wanted to continue if you feel like, to continue.
I'm fine either way.
Are you tired?
No, I'm good.
Okay, then you continue.
Okay. Okay. Both Desmond and I have been doing this for 20 years, so either of us can do it. There's no problem there at all. So we'll just touch upon a few other things. One interesting strategy that's come up a lot in recent years is using study as a pathway through to residency. Now, of course, you can go and study in Australia as a 17, 18-year-old student and do your normal university, and there's pathways to stay on. So for example, if you study in Australia for at least 2 years, then you can apply for a post-study work visa that allows you to stay on in Australia, gives you time to establish yourself, work there, and then you can seek different pathways to get your permanent residency. It could be under general skilled migration, it could be under employer-sponsored, maybe partner if they settle down with a partner. So there could be lots of options there. But what a lot of other people don't know is there's also options for older students. And what I mean by that is you take a couple, husband and wife, maybe in their 30s. If one of them studies a master's degree in Australia, the partner, the spouse, gets full-time work rights. So I mentioned, for example, in Brisbane, if you've been working there for 3 to 6 months, there are pathways to get your permanent residency under skilled migration. So let's say the wife studies a master's degree in Brisbane, the husband goes along, he's got full-time work rights. He can go and work with any employer without applying for any visa because he's already got that work rights under the student visa with the wife. So he can live and work there. He doesn't have to have the employer sponsor him. And then after working there for 3 to 6 months, he can apply for nomination from the state government. If for some reason he doesn't get that, or he's working somewhere else in Australia and doesn't have that option, then he can still discuss with the employer about sponsoring to stay on because he's built that relationship with the employer. And it could equally be the husband studying and the wife could be doing this, whoever's suited as the main applicant. Now, the student can also work. The student can work up to 48 hours per fortnight. So every 2 weeks, they can work 48 hours. And if they are studying a master's by research, they can also work full-time. So any master's degree, the spouse can work full-time. If the student is studying a master's by research or higher, the student can also work full-time. So a lot of options there. So that's also an interesting option for, let's say, an older couple that want to go down and use a pathway as a stage process to go through. And we can give you advice around maximizing your opportunities and developing a strategy that can take you all the way through. And also back to the younger students finishing the high school, finishing their SPM, STPM, or GCE in Singapore. And we can also provide guidance to assist them in terms of doing the study and choosing the right place to study in Australia, the right kind of course, because even though they may have interest in certain courses, what they major in can affect their PR chances significantly. And also where they study can also affect their chances. For example, if you study in a smaller city like Adelaide, not only will your study costs generally be cheaper and your living costs are cheaper, you will actually get a longer post-study work visa and you'll get additional points under the point system for studying in a regional area. Also, when we consider this, we can also look at the occupations aligned with that study that the state is open to nominating. So very, very important if you are considering studying in Australia, whether you're a young student just finishing your secondary education, or you're an older student or an older professional that wants to go back and do the master's degree and use that pathway I talked about, talk to us and we can help strategize that. I also have to say that if you are looking at studying, we are able to do enrollment, and if you enroll through us, the university will actually pay our fees to help support you with that student visa application and giving the advice around that. So if you are looking at that, talk to us because we can help you with that whole pathway and making sure that you've got a right strategy in place. Because one of the things we often get, and Desmond would know this, we'll get particularly the mothers, they'll call us and say, my kid's down in Australia, they don't know what's happening. They didn't, they're not sure what they can do. The education agent that helped them doesn't know anything or gave them the wrong information. And can you please help? And we get those stress calls quite often. So we help a lot of students that are in Australia, even though we're over here in Singapore and Malaysia, because we get those parents contacting us. But it's better from the outset to help them and ensure they've got the right strategy from day one. Okay, so that's for the study, and I've jumped ahead there on the slides. Once you've got your permanent residency in Australia, you'll need to take steps to maintain this. Now, we talk about permanent residency in Australia, and people see the word permanent and think that it's forever. If you're in Singapore, for example, you'll know that you get your permanent residency in Singapore. You can live in Singapore permanently, but your travel facility, what they call the re-entry permit, has a fixed validity. And this is the case with most countries, that your permanent residency allows you to live there forever, but your travel facility has a limited validity. And in Australia, it's initially 5 years, meaning that although you can go to Australia and live there forever, if you want to be able to travel in and out of Australia as a permanent resident, you're limited to a window of 5 years. And if you want to extend that and continue those travel rights, you need to meet certain requirements. Now, fortunately for Australia, it's fairly easy. The easiest way is to show that you've been living in Australia for at least 2 out of the last 5 years. Doesn't matter whether you're working, living there, studying, doing nothing, as long as you can show that you've accumulated. So this could be multiple trips in and out of Australia, add up to 2 years of stay in Australia. Within the 5 years of the PR, you can obtain a further 5 years. And you can keep doing this. Now, let's say you're not able to meet that requirement. You can still renew it based upon links to Australia. For example, we help people that are working in Singapore or running a business in Singapore that is linked to Australia, renew on that basis. So if there's some link with their business or employment activities overseas, then it's possible to renew on that basis. Now, it's also possible, and we've been very successful in doing this, helping people that don't have a link with Australia, but are staying overseas because they've got good employment opportunities that are helping to build and develop their career further. So for example, if you're overseas, let's say in Singapore, and you're staying there because you're being promoted to senior roles, and you've got maybe international opportunities that may not necessarily be available to you immediately in Australia, we can actually use that as a reason to keep your PR renewed, even though you're living overseas and don't have a direct tie to Australia. And that's because if you're considered under, let's say, general skilled migration, the idea of that is to bring your skills to Australia. But we can argue, and we've successfully argued, that the person in staying overseas is developing their skills even further, that's going to bring even better value to Australia when they move to Australia at a later date. Now, of course, this is a case-by-case basis. We'll need to see what the circumstances are, but there is provision for this, and it's something we have successfully used. But we do also want to show there is that long-term intention to move to Australia, that they're not intending to stay overseas forever. They do have that long-term intention to move to Australia. The other thing that's also worth noting about this, within a family unit, so husband, wife, children, as long as a family head, so the husband or the wife, is able to obtain the further travel facility, then the rest of the family can obtain it. So for example, husband's working in Singapore, the wife takes some holidays in Australia and accumulates 2 years of stay in Australia, and she obtains a further travel facility, then the husband can do it based upon the relationship with her, and the children can follow. So a lot of flexibility with this. One of the things I like best about Australia is that this kind of criteria is very clearly defined. So I live in Singapore, and in Singapore, often immigration is a black box. You don't know whether or not you'll meet the government requirements. You want to renew your PR, you don't know whether or not they'll approve it. You know vaguely the requirements, probably having a job there and keeping your job going, but you don't know more than that, and you'll often get refusals without any clear reason why. But with Australia, we know these requirements, And both Desmond and myself, we have access to the internal policy and procedure manuals that the case officer uses to assess your case. So when your file lands on their desk, we know exactly how they're going to assess it, what they look for, what they require, how they assess each aspect. We know that because we have their procedure manuals. We have their policies. These aren't available to the public, but this is information we have, and this guides us in how to assess your cases. So when we assess you, and when we say, yes, you're eligible, or no, you're not eligible, we have a very, very accurate understanding of how your case would be assessed. Okay, and a lot of people ask about citizenship. Citizenship is very straightforward in Australia. The key requirements, and there's a few other requirements like character, and there's a simple test you need to pass in terms of knowledge about Australia. But the key requirements for citizenship, basically 4 years have passed since your first entry to Australia. You need at least 3 years of physical presence in Australia out of that 4 years. And in the last year, you need to be there most of the time, at least 9 months out of the last year. And you need to have held the PR for at least 1 year. Now that's interesting. PR for 1 year means the other time in Australia could be on student visas, could be on temporary visas, temporary work visas. That's fine as long as you've held the permanent residency for a minimum of 1 year. You don't need it for the full 4 years. Okay, Desmond, hand back to you.
All right, James, thanks. Okay, let me move the slides forward. All right. Well, I guess there's a lot of information shared this evening, and if you at all need to re-clarify certain information given, or you have further question, we will give sometimes later to pick up some question from the floor, right? Or alternatively, we will suggest that you contact us, and we can then arrange a private or one-to-one consultation for you. Yeah, just to wrap up this session, uh, just a bit of introduction of the company, and the slide is being moved. Right. So right. So ANZ, being a company in Singapore, was established back in 2003, and a year later, global migration, and often the time, we call GMS, which stands for global migration, was established a year later in 2004. So both me and James, licensed to provide immigration advice. We are well established with our success records, and we are known for that. Over the years, we have also gained the several awards, including some of the prominent awards internationally. Yeah. And one of the prominent awards, both including the company, and individually, James, myself, are being awarded nowadays as one of the top 25 migration agency and CEO globally, by this U Global Immigration magazine in United States. Yeah, but of course, we wanted to take this opportunity to thanks all clients for your trust, and your trust on us, and we are committed. We believe in commitment, and set the right expectation from the beginning and assess. Now, I think something worth highlighting to all of you is, in our company, both in Singapore, Malaysia, we make sure that, the first consultation has always been conducted by either myself or James, or our associate director, Audrey Anthony, and no one else, because we believe, we have to understand the client's profile from the day one, and give them the right advice from the day one, and to be able to deliver, the positive outcome. Yeah. So, next slide. Yes. So over the years, we have extended our services to cover also United States Investment Programs, EB-5. Yeah, and those who is seeking to become a European citizen. So we have Portugal programs to help clients to secure their EU citizenship. Yeah. And other than being in Singapore, Malaysia, and in Australia, we have also extended our service with a presence in Vietnam, Cambodia, Hong Kong, and a few other Asian countries. Yeah, if you're not based here in Malaysia or in Singapore and you are from anywhere else, yeah, we are able to assist you, regardless of where you are, right? Okay. Uh, Next slides. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we are known with our successful records. This is an extract from the immigration. Yeah, showing, the application successful rate over the years. Yeah. And next, so yeah. So for those who wants an advice, or a consultation from us, do get in touch with us. You may send your profile to us. Yeah, and in Singapore, the email address is info@anzmigrate.com. And in Malaysia, yeah, the email address is enquiry@globalmigrationsolutions.com. Yeah, we welcome you to send us your profile and your information for us to have an assessment, a thorough assessment. Then, we'll arrange a Zoom for you, and we will equip you with all the information that you should be aware of to make an important decision for lifetime. All right. I kind of like sum up, today's sharing. And yeah, Nuru, uh, over to you, and feel free to pick up some question, and me and James would try our best to answer the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you actually to both of you, Desmond and James, for the very, very informative session. I think, I do feel that, our attendees today have gotten a lot of very, very useful information. And as Desmond has mentioned just now, if you have any further questions, you need more clarifications, please do not hesitate to contact us. And yes, we have quite a number of questions here, and some of them are very good. So I will read some and open it to both of you to answer. We'll start with the first one. Is it possible to convert skill in demand visa to PR? And how long would that take?
Right. James, I take the first
Yeah,
question, and we just,
sure.
turns to
So
answer. Yeah.
yes, I did cover that in the presentation, so maybe that's an earlier question. So
Mm.
yes, so there is a transition pathway. After 2 years on the SID, the 482, they can apply for permanent residency, provided the employer supports that. And I also mentioned that during that time in Australia, they may also have options for general skilled migration. But if they want to use the specific transition pathway, their final employer has to sponsor them for the permanent residency. How long would it take? The work visa the permanent residency, which is employer nomination scheme, does take a while to process. However, there is priority processing under that for healthcare and education occupations and regional employment. So they do get priority, but you are looking at typically 6 to 12 months. So it is quite a long time for that processing. However, it is possible to stay in Australia. And if your work visa, your 482 ends, you can get a bridging visa to allow you to continue to remain in Australia with work rights while that visa is being processed. So not an issue if your 482 is going to expire, provided you've made that application for the permanent residence.
Yeah. I guess it is worth to add on, to what Jim had just explained, right? So 2 years, is the periods where, the 482 visa holder have to have that visa held for 2 years. But with the latest changes, that also give, that positive developments for those who had a change during that 2 years, that your employer, your current employer, in the past, whenever you had a change of the employment, that 2 years is coming from one specific employer. And with the latest changes, right, these 2 years can be a combination of the previous employment and the current employment, right? But do take notes, the current employer is the one that is nominating you or sponsoring you for, under the employer nomination, ENS 186 visa, right? So that gives you an options, to switch a job, or when there's a better opportunity comes through, you'll be able to embark on that opportunity without having to lose, the previous employment periods. Yeah.
Okay, and for our next question, I think Desmond can answer this, considering your background. So it says here, I am a graduate of accountancy from an accredited University of Malaysia. I hold bachelor's degree and master's degree in accounting, and I only have part-time job experience in my record. Am I eligible for any of the visa category to move to Australia given my qualification and work experience? FYI, currently I'm working in Malaysia under working permit.
Okay. Right. Well, I guess this person would be a passport holder of other country other than Malaysia, right?
Mhm.
So if you are a graduate of the Malaysia University, first of all, yeah, being assessed as an accountant, the assessing authority would then look into certain mandatory subjects. For example, management accounting, statistic, financial reporting. So there are certain subjects would be required to meet the skill assessments requirement, right? That's one. To be assessed as an accountant, the assessing authority doesn't require a minimum work experience. Yeah, this is a very unique one, for an accounting graduates. There isn't a minimum employment requirements to be successfully assess you as an accountant, right? Now, another important detail that from your question is you are working currently as a part-time, for a part-time job, right? How the immigration define, an employment is a minimum of 20 hours per week, yeah, of minimum hours. I repeat, minimum of 20 working hours per week, whether it is part-time or it is a contract job. That is actually as good as a full-time job, and that can be considered and count towards the working experience point. So here there are two different criteria. One is to be assessed as an accountant. There isn't a minimum experience, but then when it comes to point system, working as a part-time doesn't matter. What is important is you have to have 20 working hours per week. Yeah, and being paid. Yeah, and your job has to be performed at the accountant's level and not the bookkeeper, not doing like AR focus on just account collection or account payable, right? Rather, you are expected to do financial reports, yes, expected to deal with the auditors, yes, for example. So we look at, the scope of your work to determine whether or not you can claim the work experience point. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and just to add on to Desmond, he was referring to the skilled migration pathway. So if the person who asked the question just now, if you have any further questions or inquiries and need further clarification, yep, you're more than welcome to contact us. And this
send us
next
the detail.
question, yep, this next question, I see that James would like to answer it. So James, assuming I got my visa 189, do I have to stay in Australia for 2 years straight, or can I travel in and out of Australia to other countries?
Yeah, no, we covered that. So it's a full permanent residency. There's no conditions. You only have to think about maintaining it beyond the 5 years. And so if you want to use that 2-year pathway to maintain it, then you would just add up 2 years of stay in Australia cumulative. So you could break it up to multiple trips. You don't need 2 years straight. So you could just do various trips, visits to Australia, add up to 2 years over the 5 years, and then you could get a further 5 years. And as I said before, if you can't meet that stay requirement, there are still other options to be considered.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Under the skills in demand pathway, as a Malaysian citizen, should I first look for an employer or obtain the visa?
Well,
You can't. Oh, sorry. I thought I was doing skills. No, it's
so
okay.
all right, James, feel free. Well, the
Desmond saw
answer, I think,
Malaysia. I saw skills in demand.
yeah, it is straightforward, right? So the skill in demand, right? This visa would require, the employer to play a very important role. In fact, the company who is looking at sponsoring you, right, will first of all have to be qualified as a standard sponsor. the company itself must be qualified, to sponsor, a foreigner. So yes, the answer is you have to have, a job offer, and without a job offer, there's no SID, sorry. Yeah. Nurul?
Okay, yes. And then the next question that we have here is LMT for Malaysia something new?
A few years already.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't around like, I don't think it was around like 5, 10 years ago. The problem is that when we're doing this for 20 years, we can't keep track. Things always change. And but I think what, about a few years at least.
Few years, yeah, few years now, yeah. So what's the question, Nurul?
No, there was
Yeah, that was the question. It was just a very short question, that's all. So the next one, if I have studied under an American education system for primary and secondary school and have graduated from a university in Canada, is the IELTS English test still required?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
everyone knows the answer. Yes.
Okay, yes, very straightforward. And next one is about 482. If I'm already holding visa 482, is it a simpler process with the TRT pathway to obtain visa 186?
The question doesn't quite make sense because you
Mm,
must have the 482 to use the TRT refers to the temporary residence transition, which is
Yeah.
that pathway to go from the 482 to the
Mm.
permanent residency under the 186.
Mm.
So that is a prerequisite. So yes, you must have the 482. And it doesn't matter whether the 482 is called the old name, temporary skill shortage, or called the new name, skills in demand. It doesn't matter. Still the 482. But yes, you must have that, and you must be working under that for 2 years to be able to use the TRT, the temporary residence transition pathway to the 186. Yes.
okay, so next question. This is about skilled migration. I'm planning to do my master's in Australia. While I'm on my student visa and studying, should I start my 189, 190 application or wait until after I've graduated?
Oh, yeah, I think the answer is actually quite straightforward. If you do
Mhm.
meet the requirement for the 186 or 190, do not wait.
1889.
Yeah, sorry, 189 or 190, do not wait.
Yeah, I want to add on something there. I have a golden rule for immigration, which is if you're eligible now, you apply now. It's simple as that. Because if you
Yeah.
ask me when was the best time to apply, I would say it was last week or last year. Okay. It's all a consistent thing with immigration is there is increasing demand. The number of places doesn't increase that much, but the global demand increases. People become better educated, global populations increase, the demand increases. So it becomes harder over time. So if you're eligible now, apply now or risk not being eligible in the future.
Yeah. And also just to add on, right? And for these candidates, if you are studying the master degree, do take notes. If you remember, the master degree basically having the same point as a bachelor degree, which doesn't help to increase your point after you have completed your master degree. Yeah, unless during this master degree you do work at the same, for a job at at the level or relevant to your qualification, for a minimum of 12 months, which helps to contribute the Australian working experience, right? But sometimes, if it doesn't do much, by waiting for one more year just to gain the work experience point, then the answer is just do it. Yeah. So again, we have to look at your background, your profile in detail, to advise to do it now or to do it later. Yeah, but if you have the strong profile that meets all the current invitation, and the current requirements, then there's no reasons to wait. Yeah.
Okay, since it's already 8:30 p.m., I'm just going to take one last question here, and it is for the general skill migration. So the question is, to meet the requirement for general skill, we need English, age, occupation, health, and character. But how about income? Hmm.
Okay. Uh, I think, James, we can take on this question together. Well, in terms of the income, I think what is important, right? First of all, to claim the work experience point, it has to be a job that you are being paid for, right? If the job doesn't get paid for, then you can't claim the work experience point. That is the first rule of thumb. Number two, how much is the minimum? Whether there is a requirement on how much you should be your salary. There is no fixed consideration or no fixed criteria because it varies according to the country that you're living in. The market salary, for example. And as long as you are receiving a salary that is, at the market level and not too low, right? Too low would probably raise the eye of the immigration case officer to look into that further, whether or not you're being, whether or not you work and achieve that 20 hours per week, right? So no minimum wages, but it has to be a reasonable salary that you earned. Yeah, and another important aspect is for those candidates who is actually working in another country, do take notes, you have to have a valid work visa. Yeah, that could be one of the aspect that immigration is looking at. We do come across case officer asking for, a valid work visa to work in that country, where you are claiming the experience. If it is a Filipino working in Singapore, you have to have a valid work visa, right? Yeah. So otherwise, the experience can be discounted if you are working, without a proper work visa. All right. Anything to add on, James? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. All right. So I hope, this session gives all of you quite a comprehensive session, which, we are happy with. I think we kind of convey what are the important details for you to be aware of. And I guess the last words from me is get the right advice from the day one, and here we are we are here to support you, yeah, and to advise you according to your eligibility and your position, right? James, you have last words?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a lot of questions, so many questions.
Yes.
Can I ask that you send through, because I'd love to get through all the questions and I'm trying to answer some of them here, and I know Nurul's helping and Desmond's doing it as well. But we're not going to be able to get through all the questions. So if we haven't answered your question, send us an email. Emails are on the screen. If you can send to either one, but info ANZ Migrate is us in Singapore, and inquiryglobalmigrationsolutions.com is in Malaysia. But look, either of us will help you. So
Yes.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Send to either address. Just take a screenshot if you need to, or just look at the email for when you're registered. Send your question through. We're more than happy to help you. It's just there's too many questions to get through now. But it's been great sharing information with you. We live and breathe immigration, so we're happy. We can talk about this forever. But just think about things. And also, don't rule yourself out. If you talk to us, you never know. There might be some options that are available to you you don't think about that we can talk about. We didn't talk about it much. We didn't talk about it all really in this, but we also, as we mentioned at the beginning, both Desmond and I are also licensed for New Zealand. So New Zealand's worth considering as well. Just a few points I want to recap. Australia doesn't have an investment visa, but New Zealand does. So if you are looking for investment migration in the region, New Zealand has an investment pathway. It starts at 5 million New Zealand dollars. So it's a lot of money. But if you are looking for investment migration, that's an option that is there. And we do also, sometimes we will look at strategies that someone might not be eligible for New Zealand. So we look at Australia, or might not be eligible for Australia. We look at New Zealand. And there's a lot of relationship between them. And as Desmond also mentioned before, if you're a permanent resident in Australia, you have the right to live and work in New Zealand as well. So reach out to us, give us your information. Make sure you do give us full information. Give us your age, give us your full CV, so we can really assess you. And we do that assessment, the eligibility assessment, without obligation, and it's free of charge, so you can know upfront what your options are. And that's part of our approach to this. We want people to really understand what their options are. We hear so many nightmare stories about people that just go to a migration agent and they say, yeah, everything's okay, just pay us some money and we'll get you through. And then 6 months later, they come and talk to us and say, hey, I paid this guy all this money, nothing's happened. And can you help me? And we often find the pathway they were told about is just something that's not suitable for them. So talk to us, ask questions. Always ask questions, whether you're meeting with us, meeting with other migration agents, ask questions, because that's where you can find out the person really knows their topic, they really knows the subject. Is ask them questions, and if they tell you something, ask them to explain why that applies to you. And we're happy to do that. So do ask that, make sure you're comfortable, make sure the person can answer your questions, doesn't just brush you off and say, here, pay us lots of money, everything's going to be okay. That's a danger sign. And it comes up a lot, unfortunately. But yeah, reach out to us. We'd love to help you. If there's a way to get you through, we'll be able to do it.
All right. So thank you, everyone, and good night. Yeah, and see you soon.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.